This is the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 126, where today Andrew's going to talk about Azure Cloud Functions with Microsoft's Chris Anderson and Jeremy Thake, recorded live April 21st, 2016. Today's show is a little bit different. In the past, we usually do shows where it's co-hosted by myself and Chris Johnson, but today it's just a solo show. Today, I interviewed Chris Anderson and Jeremy Thake with Microsoft. Jeremy Thake, new over at Azure from the Office 365 world. And we talked about Azure Functions, or Azure Cloud Functions, which were announced at Build 2016. This concept of functions as a service is something that was started by Amazon Web Services in a product called Lambda. But what Microsoft announced with Azure Cloud Functions is essentially their response to this. There's been a lot of news about it. They got a lot of good press about it. Other people are working on their own answers to this as well. I know that Google has one called Google Cloud Functions, but it's still in preview or private preview, so not much to talk about with that. In this episode, we really want to focus though on what Azure Cloud Functions are. I can tell you, as we talked about a little bit in the episode here, I gave it a shot myself and tried to give it to see what Azure Cloud Functions were all about. And I was surprised at how easy it was to get started. I think I had one up and running literally in about 2 or 3 minutes and was able to call it and kick it off just using the little standard HTTP post using the Postman utility. So something really cool. Before I dive into that though, I do want to say that one thing that you may have noticed is that CJ and I have been, with the podcast, have been a lot more active on Twitter recently, and we want to make our Twitter handle also a place where you can get cloud news or things that's really focused around the topics that we talk about here on the podcast. So if you're interested in checking out any of the latest news and kind of seeing things kind of curated together that's around the Microsoft Intelligent Cloud with Office 365 or Azure and the competitive landscape, things like Amazon Web Services or the Google Cloud Platform, the GCP, definitely give us a follow. We're just at MS Cloud Show. And another thing that we've done too is we've actually started a mailing list. So I would really appreciate it if everyone would go to our site, just microsoftcloudshow.com, and sign up to the mailing list. You'll see a little widget that pops up. Now, we're not going to spam you. We're not going to take your email address and sell it to some third-party vendor. We're not going to give it to our sponsors or anything like that. That's not why we're asking for this. The idea here is that CJ and I would like to have a better discussion and dialogue with all of our listeners. So one of the things that you'll see if you go to microsoftcloudshow.com/listener survey, or if you just sign up for our mailing list, within a day or so, you're going to get another email that's going to ask you to fill out our listener survey. And it's going to help us learn a little bit more about you guys that are listening to us. We want to find out, what kinds of things are you interested in? When do you listen to us? Do you listen to us mostly like I listen to podcasts when I run? I don't listen to them or when I'm driving. At those times, I don't have the ability to write things down. So I want to make sure that, for me, I know I want to get out of the podcast of maybe we'll put notes, our links to stuff, we'll put that in the show notes, or we'll put it inside of the RSS feed. So that's one of the reasons why we recently got rid of Flipboard. But other reasons why we're going to use the mailing list here is to not only let you know when a new episode comes out, but really one of the cool things I want to do with this is that when we have an interview coming up with someone, I want to be able to reach out to all of our listeners and say, do you have any questions that you think that we should ask our guest? You're only going to find out about that stuff if you're on our mailing list. So again, we're not going to spam you. We're not going to flood your inbox or anything. And we're not going to sell your email address. And we're using a third party to actually generate and to maintain the mailing list. And so if you get tired of us, it's a simple one-click opt-out to where you can unsubscribe. It's nothing you have to wait for us to go remove you from somewhere. You just go click through, say, I want to unsubscribe, and you're off. So nice and safe there. But yeah, we definitely appreciate going to this website, microsoftcloudshow.com, and you'll see the little widget pop up in the bottom right-hand corner where you can fill out, pass in your email address. But with that, we got a lot more updates coming to the show in the next few weeks. Stay tuned for that. But with that, let's want to go ahead and jump in our interview and talk to Chris Anderson and Jeremy Thake with Microsoft about Azure Cloud Functions. Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Link, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Andrew Connell.
And I'm Chris Johnson.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it. The Microsoft Cloud Show is sponsored by valid.nl. Valid is a Microsoft Gold partner whose mission is to enable its customers to excel in their business through the innovative use of technology. Valid is always on the lookout for consultants, architects, and engineers. Do you know Azure, Business Intelligence and Analytics, .NET, Office 365, or SharePoint? Look them up on valid.nl. All right, I'm here today with Jeremy Thake and Chris Anderson from Microsoft. I'm going to talk about Azure Functions. So first, Jeremy, I think our listeners are fairly familiar with you. Why don't you tell us, it's a little bit different because we've got you here on the Azure side, not on the Office 365 side. So what's going on with this? Would you make a move recently or something?
Yeah, so I've been at Microsoft now just over 2 years. Came in really using the leverage I had of my SharePoint knowledge and Office development knowledge, but I always intended to move over and transition into another department division to really push myself out of my comfort zone because I've been doing kind of SharePoint Office dev for nearly 10 years. And so this opportunity came up in Azure to come over and essentially do what I was doing with the Office division and do it with Azure. And I'm day 10 into the role and absolutely loving it. And I think the most exciting thing about it all right now is how engaging the engineering team have been with me, just like on a daily looping me on all sorts of things and making sure that I've got all the information I need to kind of push forward with it all. So it's been a really, really good move. It took a little bit of jumping off the edge to go, okay, I've got to get totally out of my comfort zone, but I'm really excited and I'm glad I've done it. And it will definitely be good to take a lot of what I learn in Office and bring it to Azure and learn a lot from the Azure guys as well.
Awesome. So what's your role over on the Azure side? Like, why do we have you here today?
Yeah, so we in Azure Application Platform Marketing own a bunch of things on the Azure stack. Essentially, app service is the core to it all, which is all about websites with web apps and building mobile backend services with mobile apps, and then API apps for kind of hosting your APIs and using those API management aspects on top from a monitoring and kind of performance and scale perspective. And then also with Logic apps where we can do those kind of workflows in a drag and drop type approach. And then at a build this year, we announced Azure Functions, and Azure Functions essentially is something that's really new, and I'm really, really pumped to see what people do with it, which kind of adds to our whole kind of platform as a service stack. So I own PaaS all up in Azure Marketing, and then there's various people in our team that owns like kind of drop-down products within that PaaS story.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I know the Office 365 community is, it's a big loss to having you switch over to Azure, but it's a huge win on the Azure side. So congratulations on the move, and be great to see what you come up with. The Azure side is always shipping. It's given us a great set of topics we definitely have a nice backlog with our podcast episodes we can go on to, but great move and good luck to you on that move.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was good to, Chris looks very relaxed. I mean, for someone who ships every 2 months, or even faster than that, compared to the Office guys that kind of had like the 6 months cadence, it's pretty amazing how on it they are in terms of just being used to that way of going. So yeah, it's been fun to change that already.
We've actually had
change is good.
5 releases since build. So
right.
Hey, other person we have on the call here is Chris Anderson with the Azure, who's PM with Azure Functions. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you are working, what are you doing for Microsoft right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the program manager on App Service, work on mainly Azure Functions and Azure Web Jobs. I also do a little bit of Node stuff on the side. Been doing the Web Jobs stuff for, I think, almost 6 months, maybe a year now, in that range. And then Functions is kind of just an evolution of that Web Jobs stuff. And the Functions stuff has been really specific over like the last 4 months. We've been doing that. It's a really new product, really fun new space. And I've been on this team for, about a year now, really focused on like the managed service products, making it easier for developers and for different teams to get their services out there, worry less about the actual management of those services and focus more on like the business value that they add by writing them. So
Gotcha. Very cool. So I know that you guys announced Azure Functions at the Build conference back just a month or two ago. There's been a lot of press about big competing technology over with Amazon Web Services has Lambda functions, and this is positioned, I guess, from a lot of people as just saying this is Microsoft's solution for it. So why don't you take a couple of seconds here and just kind of explain to us, what are Azure Functions? How would you explain them to someone who is not familiar with these?
Sure. I mean, the whole, functions as a service concept, if you will, the whole notion there is that I can write a very small amount of code. It's almost like a nano service, right? And it's doing one thing, and it can react to events coming from other services like Azure Queues or Azure Event Hub, but also from a timer or from a webhook that you send in from another service. And the whole idea is that you write this small amount of code to react to that event, and it simplifies your programming model in the sense that you're only worried about when you write that code, that one event. You don't need to worry about what's going on the rest of your application platform. It's just that one light, very, very focused kind of activity. And so it makes it very, very simple to then go and approach these activities where having a service stood up just to react to a GitHub webhook before, would have been arduous. Now it's just natural. It feels like you're just kind of what you would do as you're going through your day. I've heard people describe it as like, VBA for the cloud and different things like that, where it's, just this natural kind of macro language for doing things against the internet.
So I guess to understand what you're saying is that you're just writing like a function. You're just writing a little bit of code. I guess it's, what different languages can we talk about? What can we use here? I'm assuming .NET. I'm assuming some of the other more like the ones that are more popular today, like Node and such.
Yeah, so our two, what we call first-class languages are C# and Node. JavaScript was obvious to do because JavaScript's kind of like the English of the programming languages out there. Pretty much everyone knows how to write a little bit of at least. And then C#, of course, is bread and butter for Microsoft. So that's kind of the other major language we went out supporting. But we have what we call experimental support, so, support that's still kind of in the works for, other .NET languages like F#. One of my devs always threatens me with supporting Visual Basic. We have Python, PHP, Java, Bash, PowerShell. Like, we're really open to adding new languages. It's very simple. The way that we built our abstraction model for languages, to add a new language into our runtime in a script level of support is like 3 lines of code. So we're really pretty open to doing new things.
Can you give us some examples of like some different scenarios of when does it make sense to use something like Azure Functions? I know we've had other options to do this stuff in the past. Like if I wanted to be able to have some code run based on a certain event, where do you see like the sweet spot for Azure Functions or this function tile programming?
Yeah, I mean, those are actually one of like the harder questions that I have to answer because it's really a brave new world. It's like I've got a hammer and the world's full of nails with this. What we see customers doing is, really the webhook scenario ends up being very easy to go do. So building yourself a GitHub bot using functions is just dead simple. Same thing for building like Slack bots or for processing Stripe payments. Anything that's just a webhook already service-to-service authentication, it's dead simple. The other cases that we see are just the traditional things that web jobs did well. So doing data processing. So processing queues, processing event hubs now is a really popular thing. We had one user go and push through like 5 million events like the other day through just one single function from an event hub. So that was, really cool to see that happening. I think that it's a really, really open world. We'll be really surprised, I think, 3 months from now, what we see developers using this for, because it's basically just taking a core concept, writing a function, and it's now making it available for anything that's sitting out there on the cloud. And I don't think I could even predict what it'll look like in 2 months. I'm really just here for the ride, looking to see what customers are doing.
I've played with it a little bit, and I'm already seeing some things that it's enabling certain scenarios that were in the past always seemed to be a bit challenging. Whenever you'd want to like have some code run based on some event or something like that, it seemed like you're always looking around the internet and trying to find what's a cron job service that I can get to just go do something either on a certain time frame or based on a certain event or something like that, and then just go run my code. And it seems like you guys have both of these things in place in one spot, which makes it really, really simple. We're as just from a personal use. We're looking at it we've in the past taken our logs from the podcast. All of our MP3s are all stored in a Azure storage blob. And we have a reminder task to go in once a month to run this .NET app that sits on one of our desktops, pull everything out, stick it in a SQL database, and then we have things that can do analytics on that stuff. And I think just CJ, just in the last day or two, has been building an Azure function to say whenever it sees a new log file get dropped in by the storage blob, it kicks off his function that automatically runs and starts throwing it up into SQL. And it's surprising how simple it really makes it. It's a really cool little service.
And even for that scenario, this is really just the beginning. When I say that, it's because we're looking at services like Microsoft has the new media analytics service that's come out recently. And you could even, through the same service, take your podcast that got dropped into blob storage and pipe it through that media service analysis tool. And you could then get information about how positive were you talking, get feedback on were you talking about the right things during your podcast via this analysis tool. So really cool, just end-to-end automation stuff. We'll really see some very cool things happening.
Yeah, firstly, I'm quite surprised you say that CJ's writing code. I'm pretty sure he's outsourcing it somewhere in his new role.
I think he is, yeah.
Yeah, I've not seen him touch the keyboard for a while.
No, we're not putting any performance.
He seems to use his hands and whiteboards.
We're not doing any kind of a performance monitoring on his code that we're doing. Just as long as as long as it works. The thing that scares me about it though is it's in my subscription, so it might get really expensive. So we'll see.
Yeah, we might have machine learning scanning your account and looking at the quality of your code and judging you as a developer.
If you're looking for any kind of a service to look at poor code and how to do analysis of it, I mean, I've got all the stuff in CJ that CJ's written here that we can definitely run through it. So
you don't have to worry too much too, because Functions is free right now, so you're not getting charged at all.
Yeah, that's right. Up performance you like.
Yeah, and that's actually the scariest part about it, though, because then CJ has no like barrier on it. So it's great when he's not on the call here, because we can just have as much fun as we want with this.
Absolutely, it's his fault for not joining.
Absolutely.
So the other thing I'd want to add as well is, like, obviously coming from an office world where we had this notion or concept, and we've been on the show and talked about this before, the Microsoft Graph and getting all the services in Office. My first kind of play with Azure Functions was like, how can I bring these two worlds together and have like a webhook call from the Microsoft Graph? And so what I did was I actually wrote or subscribed an Azure Function webhook to the Microsoft Graph, just using the Graph Explorer on graph.microsoft.io. And then in the Azure Function itself, I wrote some code that essentially went and or once the trigger had happened, called the Microsoft Graph to get more information about the mail that came in my inbox. And then so once I had all the information about the mail, then what I could do is then use any other service I like. So for instance, I had a Bing Translator API call that then translated the email, and then within that action actually then saved that email back into that person's inbox, so that when the user went into their inbox, they saw the automatically translated email in there. And that wasn't long to write. It's all on open source as well, and I blogged like the immediate how-to steps. And so for me, it was going back to what Chris was saying. Before you'd have to go get a Visual Studio project, spin it up, and there was a bit more complexity and plumbing involved. Whereas now I just kind of go to functions.azure.com, and essentially I'm creating a new function and then just have this text area where I can do my code, and it's using the Monaco plugin to do all the IntelliSense type look and feel of all my code. And Chris can step in, but we're going to improve that experience even more over time. But it just made for a really great experience to get started. And, I started writing in C# and then decided actually I'm going to push myself on the Node side. And it was a great experience directly in the browser.
I have a question for you too then. So you mentioned that you're talking to the Microsoft Graph and then writing back to using the graph to write to somebody's mailbox. So what's the authentication story for these? So, I went and created one really quick just to see, what the webhook story looked like. Just went in, said, create a new Azure function, grabbed the URL with the quick start of doing the C# one, grabbed the URL, opened up Postman, plugged it in, changed it to a post, set the content type equal to application JSON, and then changed the payload to just put my name in there. And it came back with the greetings, Andrew Connell. So all of that was anonymous. So what kind of like authentication stuff options do we have of being able to secure these from somebody else making a call from the outside?
So I'll talk about it from that scenario, and then I'll pass to Chris to talk about the more broad side. So with that scenario with the Microsoft Graph, I went into Azure Active Directory in the old portal, created an application with a client ID and secret, and I asked for app-only permissions to the Microsoft Graph, which is an application that's listed there as permissions, much like there are other applications in there. In that permissions thing, I asked for it just to have read-write to the user's inbox. And then in my function, essentially in the app settings, which is in the blade for the function, I put in that client ID and secret. And in my Node code, I fetched those. And then when I did the auth jump in Node to go get my access token to call the Microsoft Graph, I used those two configuration things. So that's how I did it with the Graph. So it was an app-only trust there that was going on. So in that case, the client ID and secret are very sensitive. So putting them in the settings in there is like one way to do it, but there are more advanced ways that you can do it as well. But I know like there's other scenarios that Chris's team are looking at. So maybe, Chris, do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. Really, it splits up into two major categories. You've got service-to-service authentication, and you have user-to-service authentication. For service-to-service authentication, generally the webhook authentication strategies work fairly well, where essentially you have an API key more or less, and we validate that the API key that's sent to us is the right API key. You can go very deep with those strategies. So for instance, the GitHub webhook strategy actually signs the body with the API key, so you can validate not only does it have the right API key, but it came from GitHub with the right body, so that body hasn't been tampered with on the way. That's the service-to-service based authentication way, and that's more or less how the scenario worked when you were going from the function to the Office APIs. You were just using essentially an API key to talk to the Microsoft Graph. When you get into user-to-service authentication, we have a variety of things you can do there, but essentially API keys are out the door, because as soon as you give your API key to a user, everyone in the world can have that API key. So the way that you go from there is you can either do anonymous, of course, which, for various applications that works well. But if you need identity, you can use a feature that we have inside of App Service called authorization and authentication. This allows you to easily set up. It's actually like a one-click setup for AED authentication. And for Facebook, Twitter, Google authentication, you just basically paste in your information for an individual app registration for those providers. And then when you go and try to call the function as a user, it'll redirect you to tell you to sign into Facebook or Twitter and then give permission to that function to basically access your information about you. And then you're fully authenticated as a user with your Facebook or AED. So if you're an enterprise trying to just gently extend an existing enterprise application, you can reuse your AED tenant to authenticate users trying to talk to that function.
I see. So I could also, I'm assuming that I could then also write an application that would have a user go authenticate into using Twitter or AAD or Facebook. They get their OAuth token, and when it makes the post over to it, then I just put that in the header as a bearer token, as a standard just authorization token, request header.
I think that's exactly it. And then once our service has that token, as long as you give the actual AD application, permission on behalf of, it can then make a call out to your Office APIs underneath your actual user identity. So you wouldn't even need to necessarily set up the actual API key to do that.
Oh, wow, that's pretty slick. So another question I had then was this whole concept of not using things like the comparison that I usually see that people going to looking at something like Azure Cloud Functions, they refer to it as a game changer in the sense that it really doesn't require us to have things like we would use web jobs or we would have used like logic apps in the past. When I talk to people about this now, I have a little bit of a challenge here in trying to say, why would I use a web job, or why would I use something like a logic app when I have something like an Azure function? It's like when I first saw those things, they were close to what I was looking for, but now just having this simple thing, just saying, just give us a little bit of code here, we can run it for you. Here's inputs, here's outputs, here's how ways you can trigger it, and you're off to the races. And so I kind of look at these other things like, well, how do they fit in this whole model now?
Sure. So, there's two parts there. So there's functions versus web jobs, which is a good story, and then functions versus logic apps. I'll go ahead and answer the logic apps one now, because I think that's a simpler answer. It's not functions versus logic apps in most of the cases. It's actually more like functions and logic apps. You can actually add a function to your logic app from the logic app UX. So if you go ahead and via logic apps go and click on the little caret thing at the top of your card, you can actually choose add a function. Because really what you're thinking about it is that a logic app is a workflow based off of an event. And a function is code that runs based off of an event. So they really plug together very easily. So you can easily set up a workflow where you have new tweets coming in from your logic app. It goes and fires into a function, which then maybe does some simple analysis over whether it mentions keywords. And if it triggers any of those keywords, you then send like a Slack message down to you where you're tracking all the various tweets that are coming out about your service. And then you have like support people watching that Slack channel to then go off and like react to those individual mentions. So that's really what I whenever I get that question, I always kind of spin it as it's logic apps and functions for the most part. If you had a logic app that was just reacting off of a single event and then calling an API app, it's probably a candidate to go and swap over to a function. But really, that's not the majority of how people are using logic apps. Most people are building workflows inside of logic apps. So that's what you should continue doing today.
I see. That makes sense.
When it comes to functions versus web jobs, that's an actual versus situation. But the interesting story there is that functions is built on top of web jobs. The whole reason we went down the road of building functions was I'm a Node developer, and I got put in charge of a .NET project like functions or like web jobs. And I was like, I want to write Node code in the web jobs model. The web jobs model was so like attractive to come into. I could trigger off of cloud objects and also input and output various things in a very logical way without having to talk to the SDKs for these various services. It was a great programming model. And I was like, I need this for Node. And we had customers asking for, can this work for Node? Can this work for Python? So we started a little prototype of it, and it turned into like, wow, this is really, really fun to use, but it was a pain to deploy. And so our notion was, let's just ship web jobs as a service, right? If we ship web jobs as a service with these additional languages support, we've really made it accessible for users to just come in and try, and it takes like less than 5 minutes to actually get something running. Whereas with web jobs, you had to actually download the project, open up Visual Studio, deploy the thing out. It was a lot more work. Heck, you had to provision a storage account to even get started. So web jobs is still super powerful. It's around as long as functions is around because it's built, functions is built on top of web jobs. But I'd definitely say if you're looking for something just easy to use and approach and you don't need to do a whole lot of customization, Functions is definitely a good place to be. If Functions is too restrictive for you, Web Jobs is the next step down where you're given more freedom, but you have more things to manage at that point. And so you need to think harder about what you're trying to do. And with Functions, of course, you get serverless, which you know is really unique. It's really powerful. It lets you hit scaling in a way that would be really hard for us to achieve with just pure Web Jobs. And so we're really excited about that.
That really helps. And you threw another buzzword out there about serverless. I see this coming up a lot in the industry now about people wanting to go have different applications they're building that are more serverless. And a lot of companies are trying to tout their stuff as serverless. So how do you guys see this new movement? And where do you guys see this kind of going from the Azure side?
If you look at the journey of cloud computing, right, the very first step was just to offer some VMs out on the cloud, right? That's your classic IaaS, just VM as a service kind of thing. And then kind of started transitioning over, and inside of Azure, we had like cloud services, and we had Azure Websites, which is now called Azure App Service. And these are more managed services. You're not having to manage OS patching. You basically still have to manage like the number of instances that you have and other things like that, but there's so much work taken away from you there. If you look at what we're doing inside of the serverless space as an industry, we're really reaching the pinnacle of PaaS. You can't really get more PaaS-y than this, where essentially everything is managed for you. The scaling, all that kind of stuff is great. So that's kind of where we see serverless. It's really just kind of that peak of now everything's taken care of for you, and you don't need to stress about, am I scaling to the right levels, et cetera.
I see.
Yeah, and it is a movement that's growing. We're currently talking to the Serverless Conference, which is going to be hosted in May, New York, which, Chris, you're going to be speaking at, I believe, right?
Yes, it's going to be a fun one. Me and Johan.
Yeah. And it's been interesting to look at the schedule and what topics there are. And I mean, some of it's kind of more agnostic of the tech, and it's more about the principles behind it and kind of the decisions you make based on going serverless rather than a traditional web stack. But it's picking up huge momentum. It's something we're following very, very closely. And I think Functions is a great candidate for kind of that aspect of integrating with that story in a powerful way. And the stuff that I've seen Chris do around that so far is like, yeah, I totally get this. Coming from a traditional web stack background, it's the way you can go to market and not have to worry, even more so than what you worry on a PaaS side from running a website inside of Azure. And running your kind of your SQL online as a data backend or a DocDB. This kind of adds that another layer of simplicity just to getting work done on your website and allowing kind of you to be a little bit more, I guess, focused on the UI and the presentation layer and not about the load on the servers that you're controlling and scaling at that aspect. And so it's really interesting as we go talk to customers around how they're leveraging it, what benefits they're getting from kind of building off these little discrete events and tasks into these functions.
Kind of goes off what Chris was saying earlier too, which is it's always interesting to have some sort of a service or an API that you provide, and you have ideas about how people are going to use it, and then you go see what the use cases that people come up with this stuff. It's surprising. I'm sure from your side, it's got to be really interesting to see what people are coming up with, and it gives you new ideas on things you can even take this service forward, or even as another service you can even offer from this. Kind of like it sounds like kind of evolved out of web jobs.
Yeah, I mean, really we see this being transformational for a lot of SaaS applications that need extensibility of their platform, where they need custom code, but they can't take these customers who are used to not having to manage services and all that kind of stuff. That's the value of a SaaS application, and then throw them into the world of managing VMs. Functions is right there on that border where you can still write custom code. You still have full control over writing like JavaScript, but it's not managing servers, and it's really easy to approach.
But yeah, it's interesting because you like some of the stuff I'm already thinking about. There's a project that I'm working on where we have to collect inputs coming in from Stripe and inputs coming in from another resource. So we're doing the whole thing using containers. And so we're building a container, our own little API that's going to end up that Stripe's going to hit it. But we've got to make sure that when we grab that, we manage the data that's coming in. One of the first things I looked at when I saw the functions, I was like, well, why don't I let Stripe call the function and let the function, his only job is to put it on a queue. And then it just kind of lets Stripe just kind of get out of the picture right away. And then my container is just processing a queue, and I can scale up and let functions kind of worry about the whole like scaling thing, let that worry about the uptime and all that stuff. It really simplifies my job and actually puts the stuff that I was more concerned and worried about, puts that on you guys a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's been interesting with that, with some of the scenarios we're seeing. And I think Chris mentioned earlier on with kind of the images aspect, like I upload an image, we need to create different scale version of those images. In the past, and we were actually working with a customer that did this, where they took the image and the server needed to scale those images down before it made a response back to the mobile device, which meant that the call-off process was a lot longer than it needs to be, because you don't necessarily going to use all those, maybe, the 3 common image sizes straight away as soon as you've made that callback. So why not just send it to a function or in that case, store it in Azure Blob Storage and let the function trigger off that image. And in the background, that thing's generating those thumbnails. And then, the mobile app can have to thread back immediately rather than waiting for that action to happen. And so there's some scenarios like that where you kind of throw things away and let functions trigger and pick up based on those events, rather than having this serial process of things that the business process in the UI of the mobile app or the website triggers and can be done in a very discrete way in the functions. And because these event triggers can happen from things like a blob has been added into Azure Storage or it's been changed in Azure Storage, then it can execute the function without you even have to write the code to do that. And there's other events that will continue to add as triggers across all the rest of Azure services as well, which I think those scenarios, become endless in that way as well.
Yeah. So I have 2 specific questions then. One's around triggers and one's around development experience here. So first, let me ask a little bit about triggers. So I understand that today the triggers can either be based on kind of like a cron job, like on a specific time or a delay. Mm-hmm. They can also be based on watching a storage account and a webhook, and then I think also a queue. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head here. So HTTP, timer, storage queues, service bus topics, and event hubs.
Okay.
And then we're adding a new thing here. You can look at it on our GitHub repo right now. We're adding what are basically making it so you can have logic app connectors call directly into functions without having to have a logic app. So if you want to just have a new item inside of Dropbox, call a function, you can do that without having to provision a full logic app. That's kind of that, should I use a logic app plus an API app, or should I use a logic app plus a function? You can, if for that scenario, you can just use a function if you wanted to.
Oh man, I'm just thinking about publishing an episode for the podcast. When my producer drops in the MP3, it goes ahead and creates everything and schedules it away for us. And we've already got the JSON that explains all the metadata about the episode.
Yeah, and that's really the cool
thing. My VA is not going to like that.
There's 2 real exciting things happening here. I think that we're making it much more approachable to do these automated processes. And we know that automating things so that, we as humans can do more with our lives rather than just execute rote, things. That's going to really empower a lot of people out there. And then also empowering the developers writing these things, right? As a developer, I want my main kind of thing that I'm giving out there to be unique. I don't want to be solving the same problem that 50 other, developers in my team are solving, like managing scale, managing the actual endpoints for these things, managing authentication, setting up an authentication provider, all those things, right? Those have been done 1,000,000 times already. I can focus instead as a developer just delivering business value. And that's going to be a great place for me to be.
Absolutely. So with other triggers, I know, is this something that you see, is this going to be like a pluggable thing that we'll be able to create our own trigger somewhere down the road? Or is that something like say, for example, if I wanted like something from IFT, or if I wanted something from Zapier or third-party integration, or is that really just, is the answer to that to say, no, go to a webhook where from those services, you actually issue a post as a webhook to the function to kick it off?
Yeah, there's actually 3 strategies that we're thinking of. One is webhook, and webhook's great. If you can do a webhook model, that means that you're going to be able to support functions or lambdas or, a generic ASP.NET site running somewhere. That's the great thing about webhooks is that they are so open and easy to plug into. The next level down there is to build a logic app connector, because then you can work within logic apps and, functions. And then the third thing we're thinking through, which is great for things that aren't really HTTP based, is being able to write your own web jobs extension. We have an extensions model, and then being able to just point your function at that web jobs extension and have us pull it in dynamically. So for instance, I wrote a Slack extension in like 6 hours and should be able to just point my function at that Slack extension, and then I'll now be able to output to Slack with just 1 line of code.
That's pretty slick.
So that's something we're working on right now. It's kind of in early development. If you're interested in kind of providing feedback on how you'd like that to work, feel free to reach out to us. But that's kind of one of those things that we think is really going to be transformative, in that we're open source and we're also open to whatever you want to bring to the ecosystem there. So hopefully we can kind of get a good movement behind this pattern.
Absolutely. I did notice one thing, and I guess, I don't know if it was just me my inexperience with it, but I noticed that when I tried to hook up a function to watch a storage account, it would only show me storage accounts in the current resource group where I created the function. I was trying to hook it up I created one resource group. I was going to put my function in that resource group, and the idea was to have it watch for things showing up in a different storage account in a different resource group. And we couldn't get the storage account to show up. So I didn't know if it was like, is it scoped to, what's the scoping there for what the function can see? Is it to the resource group, to the subscription? How does that work?
The way that it's supposed to work is that it's supposed to look at storage accounts in that region. The reason we made this restriction is that there's a lot of latency that happens once you cross regions. And so to kind of protect people, we kind of said the UX isn't going to show you those. If you need to, absolutely need to, and you're okay with the extra latency that comes along there, you can actually go ahead and just grab that connection string that you would normally use for your storage account and manually change your app setting for that storage account. So you can use app storage accounts from other regions. It's just we noticed there was a huge amount of latency there, and we didn't want people accidentally stumbling into that.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That's good to hear, because we were actually looking at putting a Azure function in the other resource group that all it did was watch for the blobs to hit the storage account, and then it would just do a webhook over to the other one, or fire a HTTP post over to the other Azure function in the other resource group. So using functions to actually kick off another function just to get around an issue we were having. But I think it was more that just my experience is what you're saying. That's cool.
We've over-optimized for the ease of use, like approachability getting started use case. So as more advanced use cases kind of come up, we'll make those kinds of things easier. We just, really wanted to make sure that people that came in were successful and not building anything that was potentially poor for their service. So
cool. So let me ask you a question then about like the developer experience here. One of the things that you can use Visual Studio Online, and then there's a bunch of different other options where I saw where you could hook it up to like do continuous deployment with like being pushed to GitHub. What is the experience going to be like for a developer who, let's just say that they're either .NET or Node, and I'm working on my own laptop and I want to be able to test this and have like an automated piece to where ideally I'd like to be able to build it on my machine, run my tests, everything looks good, push it to GitHub. That kicks off like Travis or Jenkins or Circle. Once that goes green, then it goes through and it would actually push it over to the Azure function, or it would notify Azure function to pull it in on a green build. What does that story look like of being able to have that, local development without having to always push it up to see things work?
The thing that I'll say is it's possible. Because we have open sourced the runtime of this, you can actually take this runtime and run it locally. And that's how we actually develop on our team, is we actually run the runtime locally as we're developing. The thing that I'll say there is that we haven't made that super easy to get started. It's not like an NPM install and I have it running locally. Besides the partner story and focusing on quality, that's the third kind of item that we're going to be focusing on towards GA, is building better local development tooling, making sure that I can do my code test deploy lifecycle, and really emphasize, really kind of figuring that out. I think we totally grok that we've done a really good job of building a portal-based editor. As much as you can do inside the portal, I think we've done a pretty good job there. The next kind of area for us to go and charge into is then making it so that developers can use their existing tools, so Visual Studio, VS Code, and command line tools to basically work with these functions. That's kind of our next frontier.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool to hear. That was a big thing. I was curious about that. I was curious about doing any kind of like debugging with it. Is there any kind of like live debugging with it? What about getting the logs, getting the output from it, stuff like that?
Yeah, right now you can actually, if you use Visual Studio and you go ahead and use the Cloud Explorer, if you look underneath app services or web apps or whatever they call them, go look for your function app name under there. You can actually attach a debugger and debug your .NET code. It doesn't work for Node right now, but right now you can actually go and remote debug your .NET Azure Functions.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Only thing that I wanted to follow up then was just, what's next? Like, what do you already talked a little bit about that, about having like the web API hook into it, the being able to have a better debugging experience, developer experience there. What are we looking at this next? What people can look forward to? And then what kind of feedback can people get from customers? Are you looking for from customers on this whole thing?
So, what's next here in our roadmap, we're really focusing on sort of a GA experience, GA. We know that there's a lot of friction that comes along with having a product which isn't GA'd, and we're all about kind of growth on this thing. We think that right now there's a moment in the industry for the serverless thing, and we're really eager to kind of be a part of that wave. So that's going to be one thing. GA is a big focus for us. As part of that work towards GA, we'll be focusing on tooling. So basically, we know that tooling is an adoption blocker for a lot of teams that need to have continuous integration and Visual Studio and things like that working. And then thirdly, the partner story. We want to make sure that partners and our ecosystem is all 100% open and that people can kind of get into the system, easily enough. That's kind of the next category coming along there.
I know we wanted to try and get Jeremy into it. Looks like we lost Jeremy right at the end of our of our discussion here. So, Chris, let me ask you then. So, where can people go to learn more about this stuff? Where can they learn? Where can they find you? What would be your call to action, or where people can go look for things?
The simplest thing to go do is just go and check out functions.azure.com. We've made it really easy to go ahead and jump into the experience there. If you go there and you have an Azure account, it'll redirect you into just a simple create experience. And if you don't have an Azure account, it'll redirect you towards our marketing page where you can get a free trial account set up. Like I said, I think I've seen most people get started with this in 5 minutes. I've seen people who aren't very technical actually get this going in about 5 minutes too. So it's really, really approachable. If you want to go a step beyond that, follow me at CrandyCodes on Twitter, and I'm always tweeting out the latest changes. I'm tweeting out questions that we want to, kind of get from users. I have user groups that I kind of do as well. So if you want to, you can join one of those user groups. And then go and check out our GitHubs. Literally every single feature we're working on is out on GitHub right now. We're 100% open. There's no secrets there. So you can always be tracking what's going on there. If you want to send us a pull request of a feature you really want to have, we're happy to work with you.
Awesome. That's really cool. And so you said they can find you on Twitter. What was it again?
It's at CrandyCodes.
CrandyCodes. Okay, so I'll make sure we have that in the show notes, and also it'll be in the feed too for this episode. So for the listeners to be able to follow up, we're going to put a couple links in there, both to where you can go find more about Azure Functions. Chris did a session at Build. I'll put a link to that. That's up on Channel 9, and I know that there was also one of those pre-recorded videos that goes a little bit deeper into Azure Functions. We'll have that in the show notes as well for everybody to jump into. So I guess with that, Chris, thank you very much for taking the time. And Jeremy, I'm sorry we lost his connection.
Poor Jeremy.
Yeah, so I know Jeremy's having a fence put in, so I guess somebody stuck a pole right in his fiber. So
yeah, someone took a cord right through there. That's fun.
Never underestimate the power of an idiot with a backhoe.
I can do Jeremy's call to action. Be sure to check out his blog that he wrote about the Graph API thing for functions. Honestly, he joined the team just a little bit ago, and we're never too sure when new marketing people kind of come along what that's going to be like. And Jeremy came in, and the first thing he did was go and write an awesome demo that none of us really knew how to even get started with, because we're not super familiar with the Graph API on our team. And he just did it. And it was only a few questions came our way, and we knew he was a keeper at that point. So really, really, really happy to have him on the team. We're looking forward to see what he's going to do. Helping to change our kind of marketing direction here on our team, and clearly producing some kick-ass demos for customers.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll make sure to put a link to his blog post in our notes as well. All right, well, cool. Chris, thanks a lot here. And it looks like Jeremy's rejoined us. You got your fiber reconnected from the backhoe incident, huh?
Don't even start. I'm getting a fence put in my house that I bought last year, and we had the guys come in and spray can where all the cables were in the backyard that are about a foot and a bit down.
Yeah.
And everything dropped, the whole house basically went off the grid. And I'm like, they've gone for a cable where they're putting the fence in. But fortunately not. It's my router that keeps dropping the internet. I have to keep restarting my router at home. Or router, depending where you are in the world.
Yeah, well, those $20 routers, they don't last very long. So just go big, man.
I need one of those ones that looks like a rocket ship with 8 aerials coming out of it.
That's what I have. It works. Well, hey, Chris and Jeremy, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. I'm sure that our listeners are really going to appreciate this. And like I was saying at the end, usually see something new like this come out. You're a little intimidated by taking it, it's going to take a day or a half day to kind of get ramped up. I read Jeremy's post. I watched Chris's session from Build, and I was like, today, I gave it a shot for the first time today when I was on the phone with CJ. He was telling me something he was doing, and I was surprised at how fast I was able just to click create hello world, copy the link, go over to Postman, and get the thing to fire. That was pretty darn impressive. So that's really cool that you get what you guys have done.
Yeah, our goal is to make it easy, so I'm really glad to hear that you had a good time there.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and definitely have to get you on the show again sometime in the future.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, AC. Thanks, Chris.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or an MP3 file and provide a link so that we can play your question on the show. Our theme music is an excerpt from Evaporated Eric by Monk Turner used under Creative Commons. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find show notes of each episode. You can find us on Facebook searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.